Ace Bailey scandal was the biggest story of the draft outside of the Mavs landing Cooper flag. This kid, who was supposed to be a nice, humble guy, pulling the most arrogant diva stuff before draft night. But it turns out, behind the scenes, it wasn't Ace Bailey. It was his manager, Omar Cooper, pulling the strings, costing Ace millions of dollars potentially and his reputation. But it turns out Ace Bailey just fired Omar Cooper, and it could be linked to a wild conspiracy that makes the entire scandal 10 times more dark and twisted. So Ace met Omar when he moved from Tennessee to Georgia to play high school basketball at McEachern. Now, McEachern is not some normal high school. It is a national powerhouse, ranked #1 in the country in 2019 when Sharif Cooper went there, Omar's son. So Omar basically becomes a gatekeeper in that Georgia to NBA pipeline. But unfortunately for Sharif, something terrible happened after high school. But my favorite way to stay fit is to do a little working out, but I always dial in the diet. What I found for me is that 90% of staying in shape is all about the diet. And I look for convenience, a good price, and most of all, something that tastes good. MyFitFoods has been amazing for me. A lot of you guys have reached out, said that you love them too. They are pre-made meals that are ready in just a couple of minutes, and they have so much variety, so I never get bored. Plus, it helps out the channel if you check them out and use my discount code AMH25 for 25% off your first order. They've got stores all around Texas. Plus, you could walk into a store in Portland or Denver. More stores coming soon. But I've tried a million of these meal prep places. MyFitFoods is by far the best one I have ever tried. So please go check them out. The discount code again is AMH25. He goes to Auburn as a 5-star recruit, but can't play the first 12 games because the NCAA is investigating him for improper benefits and contact with an agent. But he is cleared and plays the final 12 games at Auburn, scoring 20 points on 23% from deep. Not great. So every expert tells him to return to school, boost that draft stock, but no. Sharif enters the draft, drops all the way down to the second round, plays a handful of games for Atlanta before getting shipped overseas to China. So from 5 stars to the Far East with his dad Omar calling the shots. But despite that, Ace still trusts this guy to be his manager. But what is a manager? A lot of people call Omar his agent, but that's not true. A manager is somebody who a player trusts to have his best interest, guides the player's life decisions, school, endorsements, media, who to trust. Think Uncle Dennis for Kawhi, but they're not all bad. NBA teams estimate some 30 to 40% of lottery picks have a manager. But what happens next puts Omar right up there with Uncle Dennis. Maybe even worse, because at least Kawhi's reputation might be broke, but not his bank account. Omar might have cost Ace millions. So mock drafts had Ace as high as #3 to Philly. But 1 week before the draft, reports said, hey, he hadn't conducted a single workout with an NBA team. Then the team at 3, Philly, gets a call saying he is canceling his workout and his meeting with them last minute. What? People were ripping Ace, calling him an entitled player who could poison your franchise. But Omar said, 18 teams interviewed him. They all saw him work out at the NBA Draft Combine. He is not the first player to decline or cancel workouts, which is true. 1 year before, Alex Sarr refused to meet with the Hawks because he didn't want to go there. So what's the big deal? Well, it is really uncommon for a player to not work out for any team, and for his handler to pretty much demand which team he's gonna play for. And what team was that? Well, Mark Stein just confirmed Washington was the lottery team. According to various rivals, that was the preferred landing spot for Ace Bailey. The Wizards? Look, no offense, but it's not like the Wizards are some developmental powerhouse like OKC or the Spurs. The Wizards are like an aimless franchise with no success since the 1970s. But Philly? To have a 6'8" forward like Ace pair with an all-star young point guard like Tyrese Maxey could be perfect. So why push hard for DC? That's when the whole thing started to smell off and where this conspiracy theory really kicks into gear. But imagine being a GM on that draft night. You got a top 5 pick ready to invest millions in this kid, and suddenly his camp calls you saying, don't draft us. We won't even show up if you do. You don't pull that unless you think you're LeBron James. But guess what? The Jazz drafted him anyway. They took Ace at 5 because Danny Ainge said, I'm not going to be bullied by this handler Omar Cooper. I'm Danny Ainge. And after a little concern that Ace might not report, he did show up, and turns out he was nothing but professional. In fact, the local paper in Utah said from every possible source, Bailey is a humble, hardworking hoop junkie with a heart of gold who is eager to start his professional career and continue learning. So how did this happen? That's when people found out about Omar Cooper. He posted this weird video of himself online just looking into his camera. Kind of a red flag for a dude in his 40s. And if Ace had dropped to 8, that would have cost Ace upwards of $10 million. Luckily, the Jazz took him, dropped from potentially 3 to 5, which would have been about $2 million. But the real cost was his reputation, because now the first thing people think when they hear Ace Bailey is this terrible, toxic situation. But shockingly, Ace did not fire Omar. It took something else just before this season to finally kill that relationship. On September 19th, the Wizards announced they are signing Sharife Cooper to a two-way NBA contract. A shock to people who follow two-ways, because Sharife was bouncing around Europe the last few years on teams not even good enough to be in EuroLeague. Hadn't played in the NBA since 2022, so it's weird. Then on September 24th, 5 days later, Ace finally parts ways with Omar Cooper and is looking for someone else to represent him. Is it possible that Ace thinks Omar used him to get his son back in the league? We have no idea, but the timing is very suspicious. It looks like Omar might have promised to try to funnel Ace to the Wizards without them having to trade up. See, teams who really want a top prospect often have to sacrifice assets to move up in the draft. But if Omar could get Ailey to tank down, they could get him free and clear. Maybe in return, they promised to give his son a second chance at the league. Now, I'm not saying that that's what happened. That's the conspiracy, but it looks like Ace might believe that, based on the timing alone. Now, the more innocent explanation is that Omar created relationships during this whole thing with the Wizards and used that for a chance to get his son an organic opportunity. Maybe. But the timing of this firing is what really makes you wonder. It makes you think that Ace might believe more in the conspiracy than the innocent explanation. I mean, Ace kept working with Omar through criticism, millions lost, draft chaos. That wasn't enough to fire him. But Sharife signs with the Wizards, and then Ace cuts ties with Omar 5 days later. You can't ignore that timing. So we'll see if Ace is as good of a kid as reports say and a player. Then it's great that he's moving on. And it really sucks when a young person and their family gets taken advantage of like this. Allegedly. Should be a warning to other kids and their families. I mean, we talk so much about draft busts, but sometimes it's not even the player's talent. It's the people steering the ship. Ace Bailey's story might end up being about way more than basketball. It's about how easy it is for young stars to lose control before they've even played a game in the NBA. By the way, big shout to Cheese Guy 88 for a comment on an earlier video tipping me off to this story. It was a really great idea. But one guy who has not skipped a beat so far is Victor Wembanyama. Outside of injuries, the kid has been perfect. But what about injury? Well, he just had yet another growth spurt, which probably isn't ideal. But something else happened this summer that could actually protect Wemby to finally reach his insane potential.